Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of EOXS's Stories on Steel. This is a steel industry podcast featuring the big names of the business and the advice/stories they've accrued over their years as insiders. Steel has been a vital component in American life for well over a century, and the men and women who've helped it flourish are a diverse group of innovators full of interesting tales. We hope to share some of said tales here with you today. Thanks again to EOXS for providing this platform. In addition to this show, they are bringing businesses online by providing a standardized digital workspace for all your steel-related needs. Today, we are proud to welcome the General Manager of Technical Services at NS Sales, a subdivision of Nippon Steel Corporation, Rob Puccia. Rob, welcome to the podcast, sir. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. I'm glad to be able to join you, Kevin.
All right. Well, last time we got in deep on a bunch of different topics, and I know that it always feels like we run out of time just as we're getting in good. So we talked a lot about the digital sphere and a lot about your company. Have any big changes been made in the time since you were on the show? It wasn't that long ago, but if there are any current events you'd want to go over.
Well, right now, we're dealing with some of the changes within the acquisition in the steel business of the Cleveland Cliffs company having taken over ArcelorMittal USA.
Mm-hmm.
And that has had some effect on the business that I'm involved with specifically. But, you know, this constant change in the industry, and that's something that we're always aware of. And, you know, we roll with it and do as best we can. You know, steel's right now gotten from a price perspective, it's gotten way up there as far as things go. So, and the demand is high, and it's not easy for those looking for steel to necessarily acquire it within the time frame that they're looking, and they're paying a lot of money for it right now.
Yeah, I know that this demand is somewhat unprecedented, and we had talked a little bit about that last time, but do you know if there are any soothsayers out there in the industry that have any idea as to when the demand will slow down? Like, is there any sort of timeline on the books anywhere?
Well, there's soothsayers all over the place, and, you know, it's not always something that you can predict. Things tend to shift quickly in the business. So sometimes something will occur, and then you'll see an immediate shift, and pricing start to change, and the approach of being able to find steel is then shifting as well. But right now, I mean, I would imagine that because there's a high likelihood of seeing infrastructure work being taken on within the U.S., there's going to be a lot of interest in acquiring more steel. Steel companies are going to need to address that and try to be able to ramp up production where they're able to. And, you know, as far as steel from abroad, you know, there's a lot of different alternatives right now.
Well, how are things happening within NS, like within your general purview? Like, I know we can take a broad view, but you personally and within the company, how are things going?
Good. I enjoy the work that I'm doing, and you know, the focus of what I do is that I'm very involved in the technical services and being able to provide support to customers in being able to match up the requirements of what they're looking for with products that would be able to be suitable to meet those requirements, and match up the specifications to go along with that. And when there's difficulty, which it's just part of the business, there's no such thing as perfect steel, and there's many ways of producing steel, and there's no one perfect process that is always going to be successful. So when you look at the variables that are playing here, you'll have difficulties sometimes making a product successfully. And when that happens, there is always a need to be able to understand why that is and be able to get to the root of why it is, and then address getting it corrected.
So how do you, Rob, get to that root? I feel like that's a really interesting topic that we could go over if you're comfortable.
Yeah, that's fine. What I what I tend to run into is, for example, a customer is using a certain grade of steel, and while they're producing it, they're seeing a certain say imperfection or defect condition that may be present, and then the steel is not necessarily performing the way it should in making the end use parts successfully. So what I would want to do is I would want to first look at the material and look into, were there any things in the processing of the steel that could account for having difficulty or problems arise, and use that information to try to get to the source of it. In many instances, that might not necessarily be readily identifiable. And I would then want to be working with the customers to understand, well, what is it that they're doing with the material? How have they been processing the material as they receive the steel coils? Do they put it through some flattening process before they form their parts? Are there things that would have maybe changed in the processing of this material? Are they encountering this same problem with other material that was either supplied by the same steel supplier or other steel suppliers? Because in many cases, customers are not just working off of one steel supplier. The idea being you want to be able to have more than one, preferably multiple, in the event that you do run into a shortfall in getting what you need from one supplier, or a problem using the material from one supplier. You have alternative material to be able to work with to keep your production lines running.
I think that that's an interesting point to go over a little bit, just because the supply chain in the steel industry is, it seems very straightforward. You know, like the material is mined, processed, distributed, marketed, sold. It's everyone knows where steel comes from. You know, we're all living on the planet Earth. But the idea of a diversity of suppliers and that leading to potential issues on the customer end of things, is that something you deal with a lot in sales, or is it sort of a catch as catch can problem?
Supply chain is crucial to be able to know that you're going to have material available to process when you have to be running your production process, the production facility. And everything is critical to make sure that you utilize time and equipment effectively to be able to maximize your cost and being able to make your product successfully. So if you run into a situation where your process line is down, well, every hour that facility is not running, you're losing production material. So you're not able to then be able to supply material. You're paying for your costs of operating. You're having employees sometimes that are sitting idle, and you're not necessarily able to deliver to your customer base to keep their process moving forward. Because in many cases, what we're looking at is we would be supplying steel to customers who then are making parts to supply to their customers who are using these parts in the assembly or manufacture of other final products. So there's this chain that you have here in order to be able to make sure everything is flowing correctly. And a big part of that chain includes not just getting the material in and being able to keep it running through your process and then getting it to your, say, customer. There's sometimes a lot of difficulty in being able to have transportation to move the steel around. And a lack of transportation can really cause tremendous delays in steel going from one place to another, and could also disrupt the flow of a company being able to produce their product. So there's many pieces to this, and I deal with the technical aspects of it, but there's people that handle at the inside sales desks, coordinating the transportation of the material, the time of scheduling on the mill, when steel is going to be available to ship, if material needs to be tested, uh, when is that going to happen, because the steel cannot ship until it's verified to be suitable for use. So there's many pieces to the puzzle that have to come together smoothly, and it's not something that is something that we could say is always going to flow that simply.
Well, I think getting things to flow that simply is the end all be all of everybody in the steel industry. I know that to broaden it a little bit, we had sort of veered a bit off topic, like in our first discussion. I know there were aspects of the business that you felt like we wanted to cover a little bit more in depth. Could you outline a little bit some of the things you wanted
Well,
to?
sure. Well, as a metallurgist, as I graduated, I looked on to what opportunities there were in the market, and what offers that different companies might be able to have that I could consider, and I chose the steel business, largely because at the time, well, steel is very well connected to metallurgy, and it utilizes a lot of what you're going to be involved with. And for that matter, I got into the steel business, and I didn't really have a good sense of what does a metallurgist actually do in a company to be able to be providing value and use. What are the particular types jobs? At the time I had graduated, there wasn't a very strong focus of internships and co-ops that exist today, which would allow students to get work experience prior to graduating. And at the time I graduated, I got into the steel business. I thought that I was going to be doing metallurgical work in the steel business when I was hired at the time by Bethlehem Steel in Lackawanna, New York. And I was working in the blast furnace department, which is a very early part of the steelmaking process. It's actually prior to steelmaking, it's iron making. And I thought that I'd be doing metallurgical work, but in actuality, I was assigned to be that of a production foreman. So right out of college, I was then learning all of the different aspects of what production process is in the blast furnace. And just as a quick rundown, what the blast furnace department does is they take raw materials. They take the iron ore, they take the limestone, they take the coal that's turned into coke, and then they put it into a large blast furnace and then melt it all down. And then you have to tap the blast furnace and bring out that hot iron at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and it flows like a river coming out. And they've got this 3,000 degree Fahrenheit temperature liquid fire pouring out of a furnace. And there's a lot of safety factors that you have to be dealing with to make sure that the people that are involved are not doing anything that could cause any injuries. So I learned a lot about the production process very early on. and realized that I didn't necessarily want to be a production foreman for the rest of my life. I really wanted to see about what does a metallurgist do, and I wanted to do that. So I ended up finding another opportunity, and I went to Inland Steel, and I was hired as a metallurgist. And there I was able to conduct metallurgical investigations on steel that customers were having difficulty using, and analyzing the steel and looking at the microstructure and doing mechanical testing and look at the chemical analysis, look at the surface conditions, and then be able to evaluate all of this information and write up a report to kind of assist in the process, as I was saying to you earlier, about understanding why a customer might have had a problem. Was there something with the steel, or was there some other factors? So it gave me a real chance to kind of do some metallurgical work and problem solving. With that particular job, I then was able to get another related type of position doing what's called failure analysis of actual equipment within the steel mill. If they're running through a process and they have difficulty, and for example, their shear knives that they're using to cut the steel are breaking and shattering and causing say problems to occur, well, I would need to go in and investigate, well, why is that, and be able to look at the material and be able to get samples and look at the specification requirements about what it should be, and then try to identify whether or not the material actually is meeting the requirements of what it should, and what were the conditions it was being used under, and then through like a investigative process, get to the root of what had caused the failure and what can be done to prevent future failures. You know, in the same way, if there's like a plane crash, well, there's this investigation of failure analysis as to why it happened, how it happened, and then what do you need to do to make sure that it doesn't happen further. So it gave me another opportunity for working with metallurgical skills that I had learned in my education. The company that I was with was very good at moving people around to broaden their experience and value. I then had been assigned to work in one of the slabbing mill production facilities as handling the quality of the product, and not so much the production, but the quality. And was very interested in trying to be able to control the quality and improve the quality and be able to identify when things are not right and what do we need to do to kind of make it right.
So improve, like, so problem solving, quality control, personal relations. It feels like this job has many magnitudes more responsibilities than what you were initially looking for in the steel industry.
Absolutely. Well, I had really little understanding about the scope of it. And, you know, just thinking about when I say the scope, you look at the final product, it's the steel coil going out the door, and then it goes for further use and turns into something else. But to take raw materials like iron ore and coal and limestone and be able to then produce something that's going to be steel, you have to first get it through the process of making the iron. Then from the iron, you then make the steel, which is refining the iron into chemistries that are going to be specially designed to be able to meet the needs of the finished product. Then you have that liquid steel that comes out of the basic oxygen furnace process, and then it is turned into steel slabs. And the steel slabs are then rolled into hot rolled coils, which then the hot rolled coils are then cleaned up and put through an acid bath and pickled and take off any of the scale that had been formed on that. That material then goes to a cold mill where they reduce the thickness of that hot rolled material. You start out with a slab of 9 inches thick, and then you roll your hot rolled coil and you come out with something that's like an eighth of an inch thick. And then you put it through the tandem reduced product and the cold reduction, and you'll get to something that's like 0.035 inches thick, thousandths. 35 thousandths, or 35 thousandths, I should say. And then that material has to go through another process of heat treatment to restore the ductility. Once that happens, if you're making, then it would need to go through a temper mill, which refines the properties, and then through a inspection and rewind process, a slitting process possibly, and then coiled up and shipped out the door. So there's many individual processing facilities within the steel mill itself in order to make that finished product.
So I think it's tough just because when you think of sales and when you think of any VP role, you have this idea in your head that there's a lot of delegation and there's a lot of sitting back and taking the macro view. But it feels like with the steel industry that there is no aspect of the business that is not in some way hands-on. Whether it's, picking up that phone, whether it's like working directly with the suppliers and directly with customers and consumers. Would you say that? I know that your purview is the steel industry and you might not be able to comment as much on other industries, but that's definitely the feeling that I've gotten.
It's very hands-on in all of the different aspects of trying to make a product. What we're looking at here is, if you have your people in the sales organization, they have to be working with the marketplace and the customers to bring in the orders and be able to understand, well, what is the customer looking for, and is this something that the company can supply? So the salespeople are then relying on the the commercial, the technical people to be able to clarify what it is can be offered that would be suitable for the salespeople to meet the customer's needs. Now, the technical people includes that of what I had been actively involved with in the quality end of the business, but that involves a lot of, say, interaction between where the steel is produced and who's using it, and coordinating to be able to balance the needs. So that role involves a lot of hands-on activity of communicating and working through what's necessary. It then goes back one further when you look at what it is that the production people have to do in order to make this product. And they have to be able to make sure that everything is all in order and online. They have their staff ready to go. They're trained and they can handle it. The production process is capable, and then be able to do what they need to do, which is also very coordinated activity, very hands-on. You have all of the people involved in the maintenance of the operation, that if something should break down, you have people in the mechanical end and the electrical end and the structural end being able to be personally involved in getting to the root of what has happened and solve the problem and fix something. So there again have a lot of a role to play on a regular basis. One further back is the research department, being able to understand whether or not you can actually produce something, and if you what you need to do to be able to produce it, and is it going to be reliable? Is it going to really meet the needs of what the market is asking for? So every piece of this, when you look at the people in the sales organization, you have the people in the marketing organization looking at what the market needs, you have the quality people assessing what the characteristics of the product are that are going to need to be addressed. You have the production people, you have the service people, you have the research, you have so many different areas, disciplines that are coming together to be able to get that steel out the door in a finished product. It's complicated, but it's very, I would say, exciting because you're looking at a major collaboration and being able to make the product.
So with all that knowledge, does it feel to, you mentioned earlier having to, train people under you and help instruct them. How does it feel imparting some of that experience and knowledge towards new people working for the company?
Well, I think the idea being you're constantly learning new things. You're constantly be given an opportunity to be able to demonstrate that you can contribute. You're always able to provide assistance to other people and be able to learn from others' knowledge. And the scope of learning and knowledge never ends. It's a continuous process. And for that matter, it's certainly not a boring type of product or a boring type of, say, process. It offers tremendous, say, variety and ability to use many skills. If you have good interpersonal skills and you're able to really be able to represent things so that people or customers or users of the product can really embrace the value of it. Well, there's a role for you there in the commercial end of the business. If you have, say, less people skills, but you have a broader scope of interest and knowledge in the product itself and the theory behind it and the mechanism behind it, or are interested in just making things in the process of being able to take material at one end of the process and successfully turn it into something else at the other end of the process. There's tremendous value and reward and satisfaction. Every day that I would go to work, what I would say is I would be able to feel that I left at the end of the day and had accomplished something. Not always something that is an easy thing or an easy day or not necessarily problem free or without frustrations or stresses. But the bottom line is I really was able to feel that every day I did something meaningful.
If you could briefly imagine that you're speaking exclusively to maybe soon to be college students or current college students, recent college grads with an interest in metallurgy, maybe that's what they are planning on or currently going to school for or went to school for, and they are like you and not sure where they fit into the global marketplace, what would you tell them about the steel industry?
Well, what I would say is if you look at the world around you, you can't go 5 minutes without walking around and not recognizing that the amount of steel that you see every day is just so integrated in your life. If you look at an automobile, every part of it that you're visually seeing, the doors, the roof, the hood, the wheels, the fenders, everything you can visibly see is made from steel. Beyond what you can see, there's all kinds of structural things going on within that product to support it. If you look at a building, you're seeing that there are steel beams and there are steel studs and there are steel siding and roofing and things that necessarily you see every day, don't necessarily register that what you're looking at are steel products. This is surrounding you in the world, and the idea of it's not going to go away, and its uses will continue to grow. Now, there's tremendous flexibility that not everything is made from steel, but steel itself has tremendous value, and it's used very, very commonly in everything that you'll see in the world. You look at in your home, you see your washing machine. What you're visibly seeing is a beautiful, shiny appliance that's color is just brilliant and you love it. Well, underneath that shiny color is galvanized steel. You look in basket, you're looking at steel parts. So you're looking at things day in and day out that are steel. So if you get involved in a business that is integrally involved in that, you can relate to it on a day-to-day basis.
I think that the level of passion I've seen from almost every guest in extolling the virtues of the industry to a younger demographic, trying to put more people in the pipeline and getting them to see an industry that is very underrepresented in marketing, especially with the people that could really be using a job right now. Are there any other interesting stories from the road that you'd want to share? Like, we're coming up on time in a little bit, so
Well, I'll just throw out there one other thing. The steel business has always been like viewed as the dirty smokestack business, and but it's evolved tremendously. The technology that has been added to the steel business to make things more efficient and be able to operate in the modern world has taken a lot of that, say, rugged aspect out of it, and things are technologically a lot smoother than they ever have been. So it's a very different business than it used to be. You're not necessarily always having to consider I'm going to be swinging a hammer every day. This is something where you could be sitting at a computer every day and operating tremendous equipment from sitting at that computer. Now, you mentioned something about a funny story. Okay, I'll give you a funny one. When I first started in the steel business, I was a 23-year-old kid, working in the blast furnace department, and my parents came out to visit me. And my dad had a lot of experience in industry, and he was a machinist and involved in metallurgy himself. And his view of the industry was, you got a good company there. You stick with it. And I said, well, Dad, I don't know that this particular job is really the thing that I want to be doing, for long term. And he says, no, Rob, he says, you got to think of it this way. He says, you work for a good company, you got to put in your time, you work hard, you take care of them, they'll take care of you, you stick with it, and you'll have a great future down the road. I said, yeah, maybe. I says, but I don't know quite about this particular job itself, So I took them for a tour of the blast furnace, and it was very impressive. I mean, because I took them down to the mill, and we got a lot of safety equipment, and we went up to the very far end of the back of the furnace where there's this catwalk, and you can view the entire furnace and all of the operation that's going on. And there was the foreman that's in charge is called the blower, and he's the one who drills out the tap hole on the furnace that allows the hot molten iron to become pouring out and be able to then use that iron for the whole process. And the blower is down there, and he's drilling out the tap hole, and then he makes some changes in the drill bit. So he personally goes right up to where the tap hole is, and the iron is spewing out, and he's over there changing the drill and the drill bit, and he's in this coat, heavy furnace coat with a mask on as well, and the fire is pouring around him, and the sparks are flying, and sulfur is billowing out of that tap hole and graphite is filling the air and the smoke is just getting intense and it's rising up. And I said to my mom, I says, Mom, I says, you see that guy right down there in the middle of all that? She goes, yeah. I go, well, he's the blower, okay? He's in charge of this operation in order to get the iron out. I go, that's what I do, Mom. And my mother was like appalled. And she looked at me and she said, you went to college for 4 years to be doing this? And I said, well, yeah, Mom. I says, and better yet, I do it at like 3 o'clock in the morning too. I mean, this is a round the clock shift. And then my father looked at me and he put his hand on my shoulder and he says, you know what, Rob, maybe this really isn't the best job for you. Maybe you might want to be considering other things.
I mean,
Seeing was believing.
I can't fault him for his logic, Oh man. Well, Rob, thank you so much for joining us once again on the EOXS podcast. We really appreciated having you. And we hope to have you again because there should be no limit on having good guests come by and enlightening us with amazing stories about their time in the steel industry. So we hope to have you back.
Thank you. And you know what? Maybe sometime you can give us your story.
I think no one has the time for that old ball of yarn, but maybe someday.
Okay.
All right.
It's been good being with you. You take care and stay healthy.
It's been great. And to all the audience out there, this has been another insightful episode of EOXS's Stories on Steel. Thanks again to Rob for stopping by. And remember, whether galvanized or hot rolled, EOXS will provide a digital marketplace to take any business to the online sector. Thank you and good night.